Okay, now what's for sure, November 7th at the same time, 10:35 a.m., Loof is tracking the track. Calumet investigator Dietering is called over to Kuss Road because retired Manitowoc officer Bushman discovers a potential burial site that is as of yet unknown importance to law enforcement. So this is Mike Bushman, who was involved in the 85 frame-up for the Patty Berenstain assault. He was one of the arresting officers. He comes out of retirement to finish the job because the first frame-up job didn't stick. So now they're framing Avery again. They have to bring Mike Bushman out of retirement. At around 11:30 a.m., cadaver dogs Brutus and Trace and their handlers arrive for another day of work. They are asked to check out Kuss Road, and both dogs alert to the area of disturbed earth that was discovered by Bushman. And this is all very curious because we don't have the details of the prior FBI investigation in that area at Kuss Road. And or if Teresa Hallback was some kind of informant working with DCI and or FBI undercover or not, whatever the case may be, if there was another investigation prior, were they worried that corrupt law enforcement would take her out, and that's why they were keeping tabs on Hallback? Obviously not well enough, unless she's still alive and they did put her into some kind of witness protection, and they were there at the scene, and there was something else going on at Kuss Road that we don't know about. And the FBI didn't want to flex on local law enforcement, so they allowed Bushman and these other officers to investigate the area. I mean, who knows? Because would that bring too much suspicion on the FBI if they were not allowing anything on Kuss Road? 1:30 p.m., law enforcement wanted Loof to track for Teresa from the spot Teresa took pictures of the van for sale. Loof started sniffing, showed interest near Avery's trailer, where Teresa was confirmed to be outside of, and a magazine from her car was laying on Avery's desk in the week prior. However, what law enforcement did not expect was Loof to keep tracking west all the way to Kuss Road, where a suspected burial site was located just hours before. And of course, this site, Ken Kratz had said it wasn't pertinent to the investigation. I mean, how would he know what information was disclosed? He just expects everyone to take that on blind faith. I mean, it's really weird. I mean, he really wants everything to be focused on the trailer, the garage, the burn pit, even though there's no real evidence there. 2:30 p.m., law enforcement was perplexed, so they asked a dog handler if a scent can be picked up if the victim is in a car. And the dog handler surmised that it most likely could. So starting south of the famous Kuss Road cul-de-sac, Loof tracks south into the quarry, west, then east, ending about 100 yards south of where the car was eventually found. Loof, going so far southwest of the Avery property, would alert law enforcement to search the quarry areas in the days to come. Daily conclusion, November 7th. 2005. At this point, law enforcement should have an idea that Teresa and or her car were off the property and in the quarry areas. However, no remains were found on this day, and no strong scents were detected around the berm that is just west of Avery's residence. November 8th, 8:56 a.m., Loof was back again for more sniffing and searching. Law enforcement wanted Loof to continue the track from the day before. Starting at Avery's trailer, Loof again showed some interest around the garage area, but did not continue because of an aggressive German Shepherd. Remember, human bones would be found hours later laying on the burn pit. Once again, Loof went west to Kuss Road and tracked back to the berm west of Avery's through the quarry west of Avery Salvage Yard. Today, Loof seemed to show a lot of interest on the berm that is west of Avery's trailer. The handler made the comment that the scent source is usually within 25 yards of that spot, Avery's burn pit most likely. Now, keep in mind, with all of these changing interests in the dog sense, Avery was at the cabin in Crivets, 100 miles north. So someone else is manipulating all of these remains. Like, what kind of who's planting what when, and how are the dogs responding? Because again, Avery is up 100 miles north in Crivets while all this is going on. Very interesting, is it not? Remains found around 12:47 p.m., November 8th. Manitowoc officer Jost goes to stand guard near Avery's burn pit and gets bored, so he decides to do a mind puzzle regarding the investigation. His critical thinking leads him to churn out theories, which ends with him finding what he thought was a human bone about 8 feet south of the burn pit area. The phrasing here quite amusing. It doesn't state the queso page number here in reference, but from Jost's report here, November 8, 2005, 1247 hours. I walked to the south end of the property, still keeping watch on the septic tank, while at the southwest corner of the property, I noted the burn pit area, which was located to the south of the garage for Stephen Avery's residence. On November 7th, I was asked to feed the dogs which were present on Stephen's property and also at the residence to the east of Stephen's. I remember seeing the burn pile at the time while I was feeding the German Shepherd, which was tied up behind Stephen's garage. I noticed there were some items tangled in the cable that the dog was fastened to. While feeding the dogs, MTPD officer Jason Koenig and MTPD officer Wilterdink. Have we talked about Officer Wilterdink before? Due to the aggressiveness of the German Shepherd, I was unable to retrieve the 5-gallon pails which were placed next to the kennel, this being where the food and water are kept. We were able to keep the German Shepherd far enough from us so that I could pour some food on the ground and also fill up a small water dish. Now again, going back to the evidence photos, again, check out the previous few episodes because the evidence photos tell a different story because there's a whole bunch of changing items in the area of the burn pit of who's bringing what, shovels, all these things. So clearly someone was able to easily be around the burn pit, regardless of the German Shepherd there. So maybe Jost isn't lying. Maybe another officer or a non-officer who planted the remains was mulling around the area. But in any case, the scene was ever changing throughout this whole time that we're being asked to believe that nobody went to the burn pit. Again, going back to November 8th, 2005, while I was standing near the southwest corner of the Stephen Avery property, I noted several items within close proximity to the burn pile. The items were as follows. There were numerous rings of wire laying in and around the area of the burn pile. I recognized these as steel beltings from inside tires. There was a fire which had not been burned. This was on the southeast corner of the burn pit area. There was a rubber mallet which was on the grass southeast of the pile. There was a metal hammer believed to be a claw hammer laying on the ground northeast of the pile. There was a gravel shovel which was tipped upside down located on the west side of the pile. There was a burned, charred metal scraper with a wooden handle attached which was laying northeast of the pile on the grassy area. There was a frame from a bench sheet that appeared to be from some type of vehicle. This was located in the grassy area southeast of the pile. The cloth or vinyl material which had been on the seat was burned off the frame. Still, while walking on the southwest corner of the property, I noted there were several tires laying on the ground in that corner. There was another bench style of seat on the south side of the property. This one still had the material attached to it. Earlier, when I had been in the command post area, I remember someone mentioning that Joshua Redant had checked on his hunting trailers. On Monday evening, he saw there was a large fire burning near Stephen Avery's property. The fire was described as being larger than usual. And again, we'll be getting to Redant later. So anyway, this scene that is described obviously was changed multiple times. And again, Stephen Avery is at the Crivets cabin. And he also states, as we were looking at the ashes laying in the area, it was evident that someone used some type of front-end loader to remove ground from this particular location. The ashes were inside the area. As we looked at the ash pile, we observed that there was a bone laying near the south side of the pile on the east side. Without disturbing the bone, I looked at it as closely as I could. It appeared as though it might have been a vertebrae bone. I could see another bone in the pile. At this time, we decided that someone from the crime lab or DCI needed to further investigate the area. Not mentioned above was that Lieutenant Sipple had walked to the pit with me at approximately 1341 hours, and he left the area approximately 1400 hours. And of course, with all the sifting and dubious nature of the way the crime scene was processed, coroner not allowed on the scene, I mean, this is all outside of the realm of normality by any stretch of the imagination. And it's very possible It's very, very possible Jost is not in on it. So whoever planted it, whether it was Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department officers or non-law enforcement, whoever planted it might not have informed the officers that found it. They knew it would be found at some point. Keep in mind, again, Avery's at the cabin in Crivets. Okay, so continuing the examination of November 8th at 4:15 p.m., law enforcement asks Loof, and this time another dog, Raz, to start in the Avery salvage yard and see if a track takes them by the conveyor road, where Calumet Officer Kucharski said cadaver dogs hit on November 5th. And was Kucharski the one that was sitting on the bed, just relaxing in a trailer, a potential crime scene where Teresa Hallback was supposedly raped and killed, at least the first time, and then again in the garage, when Lank and Coburn happened to find the spare key after searching the exact area multiple times before? That's Kucharski. With both dogs scenting together based on Teresa's scent, they don't stay near the Avery salvage yard, but instead head southwest out of Avery salvage yard towards the conveyor road and keep going west until they get to Country Road Q. The scent of Teresa for the last 2 days has been taking law enforcement outside of the Avery salvage property almost every time they are asked to track a scent. Daily conclusion of November 8th, law enforcement finds bones of Teresa on top of Avery's pit, but still cannot figure out why the dogs, both cadaver and scent, are alerting outside of the property and all over a quarry that stretches nearly 2 square miles. I mean, I think they're just not accounting for Avery's other personality, who may or may not be psychic, who's going around sprinkling the bones. They're just not accounting for these psychic split personalities. I don't know why, but they're just not accounting for them. November 9th, citizens were waking up to news that law enforcement were starting to get worried about Teresa's well-being due to some evidence found, quote, on or around, end quote, the Avery property. And this is from a Carrie Antfinger article, the Associated Press. Investigators fear for safety of missing woman. Investigators were still searching Stephen Avery's property Tuesday. Sheriff Jerry Pagel said he refused to provide any details except to say the search included excavations on or near the Avery property. No mention of any quarry areas owned by Joshua Redaunt or Manitowoc County, even though there was a plethora of interest from unbiased scent and cadaver dogs in the days prior. They forgot to get the dogs in on the frame-up job. I mean, was that the main problem here? Around 12:30 p.m., the remains that were found on top of Avery's pit the day before are sent to Dr. Ken Bennett, who is a forensic anthropologist. Dr. Bennett reports that as soon as he opened the box he received, he identified the bones immediately and incontrovertibly as human. He concluded, based on his examination, that the bones belonged to a female between the ages of 20 and 50. And that's quite curious, because we do have other issues regarding the bones and Eisenberg's testimony. And also, again, do we have verifiable chain of custody here? Because most cases of corruption in frame-up jobs are done in the lab by either switching labels and otherwise. So without proving chain of custody here with these remains, I mean, how much is this report worth? I don't know. Armed with the visual ID of human bones, Ken Kratz makes the order to arrest Avery at around 1 p.m. Avery is arrested on an unrelated gun charge that starts chatter at the Calumet County Dispatch Center. And of course, I went over this before too, because the gun wasn't even Avery's. Okay. The officer asks the dispatcher to keep it a secret, so naturally she lets the cat out of the bag a short time later. Dr. Bennett is... And these are dispatchers gossiping about the Stephen Avery arrest, November 9th, 2005, 1:05 p.m. And you can hear this this clip here regarding this.
Hi, Joe.
Keep this under your hat.
Under my hat. That'll work.
Stephen Avery's coming here.
Oh, good. When?
Sometime today.
Okay. Arrested, I take it, or?
On an unrelated charge.
Okay.
Possession of a firearm.
Oh. Okay.
All right.
Thanks so much.
And possession of a firearm is an interesting charge because if his landlord owns a gun, how is that in Stephen Avery's possession? I mean, again, we won't get into that. I went over that in previous podcast episodes. Okay. Dr. Bennett is identifying the bones as human, and Avery is getting arrested on an unrelated gun charge after Bennett's visual ID of the human bones. Law enforcement is following up on the cadaver dog hits. The scent dog tracks to see if anything of value is found in the quarry areas surrounding Avery Salvage Yard. Around 2 p.m., Kelly Sipple calls Captain Paul Roosh to tell him that they found many more human bones in quarry areas.
Cameron County Sheriff?
Hey, Joyce. It's Kelly.
Yes.
Can I speak to the captain, please?
Yes.
Kelsey,
Hey, Paul.
what's up?
Did you hear? There are human bones that we found?
I heard about some of them, yes.
Yep, okay. We got another pile that we found.
Okay.
Bone in, and our crime scene has now expanded by about 2 miles. What we're looking at doing is trying to find, there's no way we can organize a search this evening. We're trying to find law enforcement staff for tomorrow morning to start searching. And I don't have a state patrol supervisor.
Okay, I'll call them. How many people are you looking for from them?
You know, if we can get up to at least 40, that'd be great.
Okay. What time?
And 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Okay.
At the command post.
Okay.
And then if you could check with the PDs, see what if they can provide any staff. I want law enforcement. At this point, we're not sure if we really want firemen. We want to stick with. We know what we're looking for evidence-wise, and we kind of want to stick with that.
Okay.
I got Trutzen up at command post. I'm just covering a corner right now. And when I get back, I think he can provide us some manpower as well. So from Kaukauna PD.
Okay. And Drunen?
Yeah.
Yeah. You got some scratch paper there?
Now what he's doing is he burned her in the backyard, and that was a real small pile that was left. And we got 2 5-gallon pails full down at this other site about 1.5 miles, 2 miles away, about 1.5 miles away probably. And we got a few, we got more pails full out along the way somewhere. So.
Okay.
So they've got pails full of bones between 1.5 miles and 2 miles away from Avery's. What are these pails of bones? I mean, this is curious, and this is all swept under the rug, never to be mentioned again. Quite curious. Part of the theory was that the pile on Avery's pit was very small, and more quantities were found away from the yard than near Avery's trailer. This working theory and the human bone piles found around the quarry corroborate the scent and cadaver dog work that had preceded these findings the day before. Again, we have to keep in mind the dogs were not in on the frame-up. They didn't know about the frame-up. Daily conclusion, Stephen Avery is arrested for a gun possession which was ignored for 4 days with the help of a visual ID of human bones found laying in a pile on top of his burn pit. In the background, law enforcement keeps working to look for evidence, beginning to focus their attention away from Avery Salvage Yard and in the quarry areas. And also, again, we have to keep in mind that the burn pit site looked completely different in all these photographs. So somebody was altering the site while Stephen Avery was at the cabin in Crivets 100 miles north. Okay, November 10th, a day after Avery's arrested, local citizens are waking up to the news that significant evidence was found on the Avery Salvage Yard, but law enforcement refused to go into details the day before. The evidence, as we know today, of course, includes the pile of bones that were ID'd as human female, 20 to 50 years old, just the day before. While immediate details have not been released to the public, law enforcement knows from their investigations that Teresa, her car, her scent, and human remains were found on both the Avery property and the quarry owned by Manitowoc County. They also know that dogs seem to show a lot more interest in the quarry areas than in the Avery Salvage Yard. So if we're going according to guilter logic, so-called logic, wherever you find the bones, they're guilty. So that means that Manitowoc County officials are guilty of murdering Teresa Hallback because because a majority of bones were found. And if we're not even getting into IDs, because even the bones, even the so-called remains found on Avery's, they don't match Teresa Hallback definitively. If you haven't checked out the DNA for Dummies episodes, check those out on Mindshock and the Stephen Avery case. So they could not rule out Hallback. They also could not rule out a large percentage of the population. So those bones could have been a variety of other individuals. Could have been Carmen Bootwell, possibly. Could have been Christine Rudy. Who knows? There's a lot of weird issues in this case. News conference, November 10th, 1:30 p.m. A news conference is scheduled to fill the media and the public in on some of the happenings, and maybe even perhaps what caused law enforcement to expand their crime scene by about 2 miles south, according to Callie Sipple. What the media and the public are not aware of is the fact that Dr. Bennett has visually examined the bones allegedly found on top of Avery's pit and gave a definite positive human ID. What most of the media and the public are not aware of is that the dogs and law enforcement showed a lot of interest in the quarry areas that were 1 to 2 miles south of Avery Salvage Yard. The press conference starts out with Pagel making the introductory statement. Well, as I am sure everybody is aware, the scope of the investigation is now criminal in nature and we are classifying it as a homicide investigation. It appears that an attempt was made to dispose of a body by incendiary means. However, that attempt was not completely successful. Pieces of human teeth were found on the Avery property, and the bone has been determined to be that of an adult female. The teeth are also that of a human being. Pagel starts off with an announcement that law enforcement is positive that the bones were found on the Avery property are human in nature. The first question is if the remains are Teresa. Pagels has a reasonable response, but Kratz chimes in, reiterating something he seemed so sure about that day, but yet seemed to shy away from in 2007 at trial time, only 2 short years later, emphasized here. Question: how likely do you believe that remains that were found were that of Teresa Hallback? Pagel says, out of respect for the Hallback family, we want to wait until the crime lab has provided proper identification. Kratz states, what we're releasing at this time is that forensic anthropologists and forensic odontologists have determined that with 100% certainty, the bone evidence that has been recovered is that of an adult female. That is human remains, and that the teeth are human teeth. From that perspective, we will wait for additional forensic evidence. So he's claiming 100% certainty adult female. When asked about the possible other crimes being found during the investigation, possible crimes that could sway the perception away from Avery Salvage Yard. Question: are your investigators finding evidence of other crimes out there at the same time they are investigating the disappearance? Pagel says, I do not wish to divulge the information at this time. Another follow-up question about where the human remains were found. Question: can you tell me about where the human items were found or how? Pagel says they were discovered on the Avery property near the residences of the Averys, and I will indicate they were discovered near Stephen Avery's residence. Notice no mention of the quarry. For 3 days prior to this news conference, most of the action and human bone piles would be found in the quarry. Again, according to the transmissions here, pails of human bones. Pails! I mean, that's a lot of bones. More evasion from Kratz. Question: when were the bone fragments and the blood found, and were they big pieces or small pieces? Pagel says there were numerous pieces of bones in different degrees of size. Kratz says, but I think to comment further on that isn't really, the blood was found immediately. It was found Saturday. We knew about blood on the interior of Teresa's vehicle already on Saturday, the first day we executed search warrants. The bone and other evidence has been discovered throughout this investigation. Notice no specific mention of the quarry when mentioning the bones. Daily conclusion, November 10th. The press conference centered around keeping the narrative around Stephen Avery's property. Media reports are now swirling due to the press conference that human bones were found on the Avery Salvage Yard property near Stephen Avery's residence. This, of course, is only part of the truth, as more piles would be found away from Stephen Avery's property. The media and the public will not hear of those piles or that activity today or any other day. Now, again, let's get some perspective here. In any other case, let's say you have some sprinkling of remains and you have massive pails of bones in another area. If the massive pails of bones in another area were completely hidden from the public, from the trial, what would people think of such a case? Like, let's say you have one individual, he's accused of murder, and there's some sprinkled ashes or something, some cremains or tiny fragments in some area on his property which he might have not even used, and that were found while he was away. And then there's pails of bones, admitted pails of bones with recordings of transmissions mentioning these pails of bones, and that an ongoing investigation into these pails of bones, and it's just never mentioned again. Would people think that was an up-and-up investigation and a fair trial? I mean, it's just mind-shocking. For whatever reason, in the Stephen Avery case, all of this is okay, but in other cases, it would raise an eyebrow. November 11th, media reports are being released with headlines such as "Bones Found on Avery Land," which of course focuses the narrative only on the Avery property and the Avery family. No mention in that paper about the quarry activity the days prior. As the day rolls on, other papers are also releasing the information that the visual ID of Bennett, unbeknownst to the media and public, was good enough to announce to the world that the bones were that of a human female. The visual ID would not be relied upon at trial when it came to the 4 piles of human bones found in the quarry. There is no mention in the media of the many buckets and piles of evidence recovered from the quarry area that just 2 days prior was discussion of law enforcement over the dispatch phone. November 13th, with all of the focus on Stephen Avery, his property, the Avery salvage yard, and no mention of a quarry and other possible suspects or a coherent theory, things were looking grim for Stephen and his civil case that he had against Manitowoc County. Even though he could still pursue the civil case while incarcerated, the media was already reporting about how weak his civil case was in the eyes of the public. Man, there really was no evidence of widespread journalistic integrity even back then, was there? Wow, this is crazy. I mean, the headlines, Avery's $36 million civil case up in the air. Facts and lawsuit remain unchanged, but Hallback case would be hard for a civil jury to ignore. I mean, what does one have to do with the other? I mean, even if Avery did murder Teresa Hallback, with all of his split personalities, some of them psychic, even if that happened, how does that change the 85 frame up? Or all the years he spent in prison while innocent. And he could very well still have an additional lawsuit that all that time in prison made him crazy and made him into a murderer. Again, all due to corrupt and or incompetent law enforcement. I mean, yeah, this is all very, very mind-shocking. Fast forward to 2006, January 12th, Eisenberg meets with Fassbender to discuss progress, and later that same day is contacted by Mark Weigert and given more bones that allegedly came from the top of Avery's pit. However, this is the same day that evidence processing took place. Part of this evidence processing was processing burn barrels in all of the 5-gallon buckets that were found in the quarry areas on November 11, 2005. You can see the photos were taken January 12, 2006. Another view of the buckets can be seen in the background of this photograph. It seems interesting that Eisenberg receives a call from Weigert, who just finished processing quarry buckets and burn barrels. None of this information would make it into the media or the public. January 15th, Eisenberg gets another call from Weigert with more bones for her to examine. This time, it contains 2 tags of interest, 8675, the pelvic bone from the quarry, as well as 8674, recovered from burn barrel number 2, the deer camp. None of this information is being released to the public, as law enforcement cannot figure out why human bones are being recovered from areas outside of the Avery property. And again, if you haven't checked out the Burn Barrels podcast on Mindshock, check that out. There's so much funny business with the burn barrels, chain of custody issues. I mean, this is just never-ending insanity with the Avery case, and still quite mind-shocking how anybody can allege this is all above board. Again, whether Avery's guilty or innocent, clearly none of this is above board. February 19th, Eisenberg re-examines the pelvic bone 8675, but also photographs other tags of interest, including human bones from 7964 and 8140 that contained human bone. February 27th, Leslie Eisenberg is made aware that there were some cranial fragments that suggested that Teresa Hallback was shot in the head. This, of course, is a big point of contention for investigators. This new information that they and Eisenberg had showed them that Teresa was shot. Since the perception is that Avery did it, it had to mean that Avery shot her. They get so frustrated that Brendan couldn't think of the answer they were looking for, they came right out and asked him themselves.
All right, I'm just going to come up and ask you, who shot her in the head?
He did.
Why didn't you tell us that?
So I couldn't think of it.
So clearly reverse engineering the coercion necessary to get Brendan Dassey to so-called confess to this crime. And again, if you look at some of these other conversations with Brendan, he can't keep focus, he's all over the place, and here you have these corrupt officials to Brendan who are these figures of authority berating him and threatening him, and he doesn't know what's going on. Even if they were non-corrupt nice guys, he still wouldn't know what was going on. So compounding to the emotional distress they're inflicting on this kid, I mean, it's really mind-shocking how anybody can defend this obvious corrupt coercion. It's just absolutely insane. March 1st, Brendan Dassey is coerced to give a narrative that the media and the public were not aware of. It was such a secret narrative that even Kratz himself says they have now determined what happened on Halloween 2005. No mention up until this point about the quarry activities or the other human bones that have been recovered and identified up to this point of the investigation. A clear about face from their actions in November 2005. However, they stayed consistent in the manner that they continued to focus all the details they released to be about Avery and his property. April 10th to 11th. On these days, over a month after Brendan Dassey is arrested and the rape, torture, killing on the Avery property is published to the media and the public, Leslie Calumet, Manitowoc, and DCI personnel all met to finally process all of the 5 gallons of pails found all over the quarry areas. Notice you'll find good old Manitowoc County Detective Remacher still involved in the case. Interesting items were recovered, including what looked like blood-stained rock, possible bones, human bone fragments, a bunch of other expletive. None of the items found above were ever disclosed to the media. No press conference was held to expand on the working theory that Ken Kratz and law enforcement held. Again, in an above-board case, are these the actions that would be taking place? So they arrest Brendan Dassey, and they still don't process any of these human remains and bones, or potentially human remains and bones, found all over the quarry matching the dog scents. Nobody's interested. It's really weird. It's really weird, is it not? April 25th, Leslie Eisenberg examines a bunch of biological material recovered in the last few months and makes bench notes on each tag number that she examines. Most of these items were from the 5-gallon buckets recovered from the quarry. Leslie also makes note of human bones with cut marks in this examination on this day. None of this new information ever made it into the media or the public. The theory was not expanded, nor was the criminal complaint to contain any of these details. The perception was still, at this time, that Teresa was last on Avery's land and never left. June 15th. Eisenberg re-examined some tag numbers from this case that she had marked for reevaluation. One particular tag number of interest is 7964, which is from burn barrel number 2, or the deer camp. To this day, no clear verification has ever been given. Anyway, upon further examination, Leslie updates her determination of the bone in the baggie to being human. July 4th, Eisenberg releases her entire report documenting her findings to date. Her findings include multiple human bones that were found outside of the Avery salvage yard and a detailed age and sex determination of the bones she examined. Lastly, Leslie identifies 7964 and gives a possible detail on time since Teresa's death because of some clues on the human bone. And this is her note here. The presence of empty pupil casings, tag number 7964, collected November 12, 2005 from barrel number 2 and identified as burnt bone pieces, suggests that perhaps there was an undocumented interval between Miss Hallback's death and the burning episode when her remains may have been exposed to egg-laying flies. However, it is not possible to determine from this analysis if those pupil casings were associated with the human or non-human fragments identified by the undersigned as collected under that tag number. It is worthy of note, however, that the same evidence tag number yielded the suspected human bone fragment with evidence for multiple cuts. And if you haven't checked out the Mindshock episode on pupil casings, check that out. We go over that pretty extensively as well. Remember, this bone was recovered from either burn barrel number 2 or the deer camp. None of this information was ever disclosed to the media or the public. No press conference was held to expand on the details of the theory that was against Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. The crime was still said to have happened on the Avery property. December 3rd, 2006. Eisenberg submits her second and final report on the Avery case. This report encompasses work that took place from July through December 2006, a time where Buting and Strang were squarely focused on Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office as the culprits of planting and possible Denny suspects like Bobby and Scott. Leslie mentions tag number 7964 again and mentions that it has cut marks. This bone does not come from Avery's pit, but rather burn barrel number 2, and actually produced other body parts besides just bones. Lastly, Leslie identifies many tag numbers that are human bone. Not suspected human, but directly human. These tag numbers are the items she examined that came from the quarry area. None of this information is ever released to the media or the public. The perception is that Teresa never left the Avery salvage yard alive. Fast forward to 2007. During trial and closing arguments, Ken Kratz gave the jury, the media, and the public his thoughts about what he felt about Eisenberg's human determination just 3 months prior. Attorney Kratz, so the bones in the quarry are really not evidence in this case. And so Mr. Strang has made a big deal out of showing you maps and a little flag and things like that about possible bones. Again, speculation, conjecture is not part of this case. Facts are going to be what decides this case. And that's almost comical in nature because they've provided no facts that Avery or Dassey committed any crime here. If you notice what Kratz does, he says the quarry burns are not evidence in this case. He says this, of course, because Eisenberg only testifies in reference to the quarry about tag 8675, the suspected human pelvic bone. Neither the state or defense ask her specifically about the bones she deemed as human in her December 2006 report. The public perception is that all of the bones were found on the Avery property and that Stephen Avery murdered Teresa on Halloween 2005 with the aid of Brendan Dassey. No mention was made of the strong dog interest nearly 2 miles south-southwest and the many buckets of piles that recovered human bone. Now, I don't know why the guilters are so desperate to ignore all of this if they claim they really are after the truth. So did someone else get murdered in the quarry? Because they're saying they're human bones. They were identified as human bones. And if we're saying that identification cannot be definitive, well, what about the bones that are supposedly Teresa's? So it's really weird where it's convenient to hallucinate that this is all 100% when it points to Avery. But to claim that there's anything that doesn't lead to Avery, that's all conjecture. The psychological projection of Ken Kratz knows no bounds. Fast forward to 2011, September 20th, the infamous day that the many human bones were returned to the family. Many of these bones were found on January 12th, 2006, during evidence processing. To give you a visual of just some of the tags and bags that were returned, see here. You'll note that item 7964, the bag that was identified as human in the summer of 2006 by Eisenberg, was part of this group. None of this was ever reported to the media or the public. Heck, this action violated Stephen Avery's rights, if by nothing else, not notifying him or his lawyer of biological evidence being returned. So wait a second. They're returning bones found in the quarry to Teresa Hallback's family? If they're not pertinent to this case, then why would they be returned? If they're not Teresa Hallback, why are they being returned to her family? I mean, these are questions that need to be answered, and nobody's answering them. I mean, I don't know what to make of this. The Mindshock listeners, feel free to give your thoughts on this. This is all quite mind-shocking. The conclusion here from the onset of their defense of Avery, Buting and Strang had the right track but the wrong targets. The targets were Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office and their civil lawsuit. Ken Kratz was more than happy to have that be the case in chief of his opponents because he knew all too well that the energy would be spent there and not in the quarry, where neither the media or the public knew anything about the many pieces and cents of Teresa Hallback. The tunnel vision wasn't necessarily only with Manitowoc County and Queso, it was with Pagel and Kratz from the early days of November 2005. So yeah, it's all very, very curious. It's all very, very curious. There's no mention, again, also of this FBI investigation taking place prior to Teresa Hallback, possibly having to do with Teresa Hallback being a CI, possibly not. Again, if you haven't checked out the previous episode, make sure you check out the previous episode. But when you're looking at the totality of the timeline and how Kratz was trying to fool everybody, it all makes a lot better sense when you're looking at it in hindsight. And again, Kratz, Manitowoc, they never knew that there would be this level of scrutiny levied upon their corruption and frame-up of Stephen Avery. And this is without even getting into all of the coincidences with Christine Rudy, with Carmen Boutwell. I mean, there's just a never-ending stream of coincidences and anomalies that the guilters just stick their head into the sand, nothing to see here, all on the up and up. You don't see this in other cases. In legitimate up and up investigations and cases and rightful convictions, you don't see any of this. So it's just really, really bizarre how the guilters desperately cling to the words of Ken Kratz, which are conflicting in and of itself, but there's really no substance to anything said here, and it's very obvious on how this is framed in hindsight. At the time, it was a little more difficult, and all these muddying of the waters regarding chain of custody and all these things, was that all by design as well, or was it a combination of incompetence and corruption? Because obviously there's no evidence that every single member of Manitowoc was in on this frame-up. It could have only been a couple people. Everybody else is just following orders. So a few comments here regarding this timeline. No mention of blood until the morning of the 6th when the crime lab accessed the RAV4, finding it unlocked. And that those, again, if you haven't checked out the RAV4 episodes in the Mindshock podcast, there's 3 episodes. We go into detail the timeline, getting the RAV4 to the crime lab, all of the bizarre issues, again, that you don't see in any other case. The only blood mentioned prior was blood in Stephen Avery's trailer on a door frame collected on the 5th by Coburn. The following day, the 6th, they collected more blood from the bathroom laundry area. It's documented in the case reports and also in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office reports. So what is Ken Kratz yammering about? How the expletive did he know about the blood in the RAV4 on Saturday the 5th? A response here, yeah, that is the one thing that sticks out in my mind. He is so sure of the blood being found on Saturday. Or he realized later on that he expletive up by stating that and had to fix it by the doors were locked and the RAV4 was never opened at Avery Salvage Yard. This case is such expletive of manipulation and corruption.